Welcome to Close Encounters of the Holy Kind, a Lent lectionary podcast. I am Pastor Sarah Casey, pastor at Tibbetts United Methodist in West Seattle, and I'm here with my friends.
I'm Rachael.
I'm Charles.
This episode is recorded for Sunday, March 19th. It's the fourth Sunday of Lent, and we'll be reading the Gospel of John, chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. And I'm going to be reading from the New Revised Standard Version today. Rachael, what are you reading from?
I am reading from the Common English Bible.
Common English. Charles?
The Message.
The Message. We've settled in. We know what we like. Okay, so let's go ahead and read this text. It's a little lengthy, so we're going to split it up into three parts. And I'll start. Here we go. John 9. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me. While it is day, night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with his saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' When I went and washed, I received my sight." They said to him, "Where is Jesus?" He replied, "I do not know."
They marched the man to the Pharisees. This day, when Jesus made the paste and healed his blindness, was the Sabbath. The Pharisees grilled him again on how he had come to see. He said, "He put a clay paste on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "Obviously, this man can't be from God. He doesn't keep the Sabbath." Others countered, "How can a bad man do miraculous, God-revealing things like this?" There was a split in their ranks. They came back at the blind man. "You're the expert. He opened your eyes. What do you say about him?" He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews didn't believe the man was blind to begin with. So they called the parents of the man now bright-eyed with sight. They asked them, "Is this your son, the one you say was born blind? So how is it that he now sees?" His parents said, "We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind, but we don't know how he came to see. Haven't a clue about who opened his eyes. Why don't you ask him? He's a grown man and can speak for himself." And this is in parentheses. His parents were talking like this because they were intimidated by the Jewish leaders who had already decided that anyone who took a stand that this was the Messiah would be kicked out of the meeting place. That's why his parents said, "Ask him, he's a grown man." They called the man back a second time, the man who had been blind, and told him, "Give credit to God. We know this man is an impostor." He replied, "I know nothing about that one way or the other, but I know one thing for sure. I was blind. I now see."
They questioned him, "What did he do to you? How did he heal your eyes?" He replied, "I already told you and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" They insulted him. "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we don't know where this man is from." The man answered, "This is incredible. You don't know where he is from, yet he healed my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. God listens to anyone who is devout and does God's will. No one has ever heard of a healing of the eyes of someone born blind. If this man wasn't from God, he couldn't do this." They responded, You were born completely in sin. How is it that you dare to teach us?" Then they expelled him. Jesus heard they had expelled the man born blind. Finding him, Jesus said, "Do you believe in the human one?" He answered, "Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him." Jesus said, "You have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." The man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped Jesus. Jesus said, "I have come into the world to exercise judgment so that those who don't see can see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard what he said and asked, "Surely we aren't blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you wouldn't have any sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." Word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Ooh, this is a juicy one. A lot going on. A lot going on. Initial thoughts and reactions. What stood out to you? What's rising to the surface after hearing this?
First of all, from your reading about verses somewhere in verses 3 through 5, that's the chunk that I have. But Jesus, when he's saying like something about God caused this man to be blind so his power could be seen or whatever. And my translation's different. Jesus is saying, you're looking for someone to blame. There is no such cause effect here. Look instead for what God can do. And
Ooh, that's
it
so much better.
I mean, it's so different, right? Because to think that God would like that's the complete antithesis of what God is, like
Mhm,
that
mhm.
God would cause this to happen to somebody. And I guess I also want to be careful that I'm not speaking like ableist language, but
Mhm.
just thinking about the story as a whole, and from what I understand of what God is, like God is wholeness, God is healing, God is hope. And um I think that this, yeah, like right here, the look instead for what God can do, like, and we being here to, our bodies are like God's communication instruments here in this
Mhm.
earth, and like um anyway, that was kind of the first thing that rose to the surface for me, was just that translation. I was like, oof, that's tough to swallow, and doesn't really line up with what we're told about God. So
Mhm.
I don't know. Did you both, like, I had this like knee jerk like like reaction to that.
Yeah, that part also definitely stood out to me as well. And I think this is a text, like so many in the Bible, probably all of them, that it's like approach with caution, right? Like we have to be very careful with the things that we're inferring, how we're using it, what we're, what's sort of between the lines with assumptions. And like you said, Charles, this is one that has potential and has been used in very ableist manners. So I think it's really important to name that and understand the implications of what we're talking about. And I think, yeah, I'm looking for that verse that you mentioned, because that also caught my eye. It's verse 3. So my translation says, in answering the question of who sinned, him or his parents, Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents. This happened so that God's mighty works might be displayed in him." I think it's compelling and interesting that it doesn't say by healing him, by removing his blindness, like until his blindness is removed, then then God's work is revealed. I think it speaks to the ways that differently abled people offer different gifts in our world. So, it doesn't speak to, he has to be healed first or changed from who he currently is. As he was born, he is good and worthy and has truth to reveal and power and gifts and graces and is God's beloved. So I think that's just like a minor semantics thing. I love picking out those little, but it doesn't say.
Yes. Yeah.
like what's not in the text, I think is something I always like to pick out what it doesn't say. So yeah, that also had caught my eye, Charles, and I love the Message version. That is, as usual, so beautiful.
I appreciate what the text doesn't say, because it's so easy to just read these things and gloss over them, and even if I read this over and over, there's so many wonderful ways, or like, tools that we can have to think about what this is or isn't saying. And
Mhm. Well, speaking
yeah,
of what the text isn't saying, this man has no name.
that
So
seems to be a theme lately.
yeah, Samaritan woman, no name,
Blind
man
man.
born, I mean, the man born blind.
Yeah.
Even, and I'm pretty sure he's called that even after he's healed. Yeah, I think he's referred to, or is the formerly blind man or something, but never given a name. Never given a name. Yeah, this is just incredible. This like back and forth then of this man being passed around to all of these people to defend and explain himself. My verse 9, the neighbors are asking, is this the man that used to beg? Is this him? And it says, he kept saying, I am the man. But they kept asking him, and he kept saying, and there was another translation I was reading earlier this week that said he kept insisting that he is the man, right? And then of course we have this, back, and we see this again with the Pharisees, and like, then they come back to him after his parents throw him under the bus. But this man just constantly repeating himself over and over and over again and saying, like, this is my lived experience, this is who I am, and nobody believes him. Nobody believes him. Like that right there is just mind-blowing. I mean, it's heavy, like the exhaustion of constantly, defending yourself and explaining yourself. Yeah.
No, that sparked something for me, because
Yeah.
I was looking through it, and my verse 8, it was like, soon the town was buzzing. His relatives and those who year after year had seen him as a blind man begging were saying, why, isn't this the man we knew who sat here and begged? And it's almost like they can't recognize him without this other feature, right? Like all they could see was that he was a blind beggar. That's all they knew. And like, now something has changed or shifted, even though he's saying like, it's me, like, yes, that's me. They're like, no, you don't have this one thing that we've only known you. Like, it's just like they can't open their eyes to change. Like they're saying willfully blind to, well, I'm imagining like, why would someone heal him? Or, like all these voices of judgment, like, what's so special about him? I mean, I'm sure he's not the only blind beggar or, person that wasn't able to see, but just that, like, no one's willing to look past how they categorized him, right? Like no one's
Yes.
able to see past that.
He doesn't fit in the box. So he has to be like dismissed and cast out. And when he was blind and he was, a beggar, there was a certain way that people related to him, and really they could just look away. Like they didn't
Mhm.
have to see him. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh, based on our social constructs and social norms, now that you are able to see, that means that we have to engage with you differently. And we don't really want to do that. I mean, it's really based on all their social constructs, right? Like
Yeah.
these are the boxes they've created, even the Pharisees, like this is our understanding of the law, and therefore, the person that healed you did it on the Sabbath, so he can't be the Messiah, and he also needs to be rejected. Like, you don't fit our box, you don't fit our rules, you don't fit our categories, so we can't accept you.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
I also, the whole washing at the pool of Siloam, which means sent. I don't know what all like the historical context of these pools, like there are public bathhouses or whatever, public pools where people bathe, but or if it's just like a place you go to wash your face, you know, in the middle of the city. um Part of me when I was reading this, like Jesus sends him to go wash, like how did he know how to get there, you know, like how did he find his way to this pool? um I don't know what that means, but just part of this, like Jesus like sends him off on his own, like, here, I know you can't see, but go to this pool and wash your eyes. So it's, I part of me was like, was it because like this pool had some kind of significance in their culture that Jesus was like, he needs to like believe that he needs to go do this, but in reality, like it's already done. You know, like I'm kind of caught up on this, but um I was also struck by that, like, I'm going to make this clay paste and put it on your eyes, and I'm just going to send you off on your own to go to this pool. And part of me is like, well, how did he get there? But
Well,
um
and there's this very like there's the man participates in his own healing. Like I
right.
love that like Jesus uses his spit, gross, but like his spit, the earth, and then like puts it on this man and it's like, okay, it is time. Like you do this, right? Like there's something in that I find pretty profound theologically of like, you know, Jesus like gives him the path, the tools, I don't know, and the man participates in his own healing. Rachel, do you know anything about this pool, the pool of Siloam? Yeah.
Not off the top of my head. Unfortunately, I wish I did.
No, and I don't have my
Yeah.
Bible
I don't
with the
wanna look it up.
commentary baked in,
Yeah.
so
Oh
Yeah.
I don't know.
no, I love that he's participating. Like because like I just I think Jesus is like, this man, like this is a way for his, like, he's like, maybe this is how healing would happen, and like so Jesus does that for him. Like I really um I feel like Jesus kind of goes above and beyond, and is like meets people where they are at, like with their belief or like their comfort or whatever. And yeah, sorry.
I'm thinking about like the just like the formula of this healing, and thinking about, I mean, like the difference between like science and mysticism, I guess, and the word encounter, and as our theme. And so I think, Sarah, you said, yeah, or maybe it was Charles, I'm not sure. At what point did the healing happen? And like with a scientific method, for science to be valid, it has to be like able to be replicated. And so if you were to write out these instructions, like, okay, if you are someone who is blind, all you have to do, spit in some dirt, rub it on your eyes, and go to this specific pool and rinse it off, and then you're healed. I haven't experienced that, but I don't think that would work. But so it's like, what about this was the healing? Did it need, I love, and again, Jesus in John's gospel particularly is such a little showman. I love it so much. he's all about the flair, the drama.
The drama,
So,
God's drama.
Yeah, it's like, Jesus could have just healed him by saying, you are healed.
Snapped fingers.
So, but the whole, gross, like spitting, rubbing in his eyes, and then sending him out. I'm just thinking about like, that wasn't what healed him, but it was this encounter and his own agency and his own healing, as you both pointed out, that he was then sent on his own and did take that step of faith. So just, I guess I sound a little bit like all the people in this story. They're like, how? It's like, maybe we don't need to know that. I don't know. I think that's interesting.
Well, and that reminds me that you named, our theme is encounter, and, all these aspects of wilderness life that we encounter walking through Lent, through the scripture, and then encountering the holy through those things. So we've talked about temptation, we've talked about thirst, we've talked about darkness, and sort of the theme we're honing in on in worship this week, and with this text, is judgment. And initially when I read it, I was thinking about how all of the people like judged this man, judged him for being blind. He must be a sinner. There has to be a direct correlation between, what's going on with him physically and if he hasn't sinned, it has to be his parents.
Mhm.
And then of course the neighbors and the Pharisees judging, not believing him, judging Jesus. And then, at the end, the line that Jesus says, and I don't want to hop around too much, but, Jesus says this line, I liked your translation a lot, Rachel, because mine just says, I came into this world for judgment, and yours was a little softer than that.
To exercise judgment is what mine
Yes, to exercise
Yeah.
judgment. Yeah. Which is interesting because a couple weeks ago in John 3:17, what did Jesus say? I came not to judge or condemn the world, but to save it, something like that. I don't know what to do with that Jesus line, but the point of this is this judgment that we see. And I've been spending time as I've read this text in a couple different contexts this week, just thinking about how judgment and particularly like social constructs and our unconscious bias like shape our judgments, and how important it is. And I think part of being a follower of Jesus to be aware of that, like to be curious about why you're judging somebody and why you feel, so righteous in your judgment of someone else. I've had a couple of encounters the last few weeks where people have been very judgmental of me and I have reciprocated where I'm like, fine, you're going to judge me. Let me judge you and tell you all the reasons why you're wrong. Or I never say that. I just think it in my head, but yeah, judgment is an interesting theme here to reflect on, as disciples, how we see this unfold. Yeah.
Mine doesn't say anything about judgment.
Really?
We're talking about the end when Jesus is talking to, he's like, Master, I believe, right? And then Jesus responds. Is that when yours talks about
Yep,
judgment?
it's right
Yeah.
after that. Yep.
Yeah, mine says, Jesus then said, I came into the world to bring everything into the clear light of day, making all the distinctions clear, so that those who have never seen will see, and those who have made a great pretense of seeing will be exposed as blind.
Wow. Gold trophy goes to the message this week.
Yeah.
Trophy
Yeah.
goes to the message. Dang.
I appreciate this because it's like Jesus is flipping the world's understanding and judgment on its head, right? Like that's the thing. That's it. Case closed. We can go home. Yeah. But I mean,
Wow.
I guess it's not it is a judgment in a way, but it's like it's righteous judgment, but it's not judgment as we think of like judgment, right? It's like teaching us what is true and teaching us what is God-given, which is everything. It's just sometimes we start to believe these other things like about ourselves. And I can also identify with a group of people that likes to follow rules, like and that idea of judgment of like, well, I'm following all these rules, like why aren't you? And so often I wonder, like, would I have been at odds with Jesus? Like, what is he doing? Like, he's stepping out of line, and I've been so good at like towing the line and keeping in line, and yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because the question sort of becomes, if I'm living my life by this particular set of rules or, boundaries, I'm living my life in this way, and somebody else is living their life in another way. It's almost like the assumption we immediately go to is they must be at odds with each other because they're different.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, we can live our lives differently and have it not be like this threat, right? Like even the parents who are like, we're afraid of the Jewish leaders, we're afraid. And so they did not stand up and defend their son, which, like, I'm sorry, your one job as a parent is to stand by your kid, but that fear that, because the Pharisees, religious leaders, felt so threatened by what Jesus was doing and this like other way of moving in the world as a person of faith, as a Jewish person, as a, someone who was devout, in their practice of faith and service to God. I mean, that threat level, which I think is also, part of our like assumptions and preconceived notions. And as soon as we encounter something that is different from what we have known or what we assume or what we expect based on what we know, which is always limited because we each have our own worldview and perspective. But yeah, why there's that threat there of that is constantly like the undercurrent of all the gospels, with Jesus at odds with these religious leaders. And I'm with you, Charles. Like, I think that I, would have been at odds with Jesus. I mean, especially if you're like a person who has always done what you were supposed to do. I mean, I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I know all about that. There's no way I would have been totally on board with everything he was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? I have so much to say, but I don't want to dominate our conversation. So
it's interesting to me. I mean, just while you were talking, Sarah, this sort of emerged for me, the sort of wait a minute of the parents' role in this passage, and the fact that he is a beggar on the streets. So like perhaps he was already at odds with his parents well before this day and this encounter. Right? Like if you have parents, why are you begging on the street? Like if you have family, why have they already ostracized you? And I think, there's so much there as far as why he was ostracized in the first place, in addition to being a blind person and, what all the many factors that could have been part of this person's origin story. But that just kind of caught my eye of like, there's way more to this story before we meet this dysfunctional family. So
yeah, that's good. I had not thought of that. I had not made that connection.
I hadn't either.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking the disciples were asking who sinned, the man or his parents. Maybe they thought, oh my gosh, our child is blind, or it's sinful, they're sinful, we have to put them out on the street. Or maybe, I don't know about the time, but maybe like, well, you're blind, like this is what you have to do, like this is what's expected of you, is you go
This is your lot in
beg
life.
for money. Yeah, like, yeah, that opens up a whole bunch of questions, Rachel, that I'm like, maybe that's just what happened. Like, they're like, oh no, one of us, maybe they blamed themselves and they were so consumed with that self-judgment that, they pushed their child out. Because just like I said, going back to that first verse where or first couple of verses where the disciples are asking who sinned to cause this person to be born blind, like, how did they come to that conclusion that there had to be sin involved for this to, to be a thing? And maybe that's what everybody believed at this time was, if something doesn't match up to their standards, it's because there was sin involved. And I think Jesus circumvents that question. In mine, he says, you're asking the wrong question. Like, that's not really the question, but he doesn't say it that way.
Well, it's interesting because who's asking him the question? His disciples.
Yeah.
It's not the neighbors or the Pharisees or the parents. Like the disciples are the ones that are like, oh, I mean, that's fascinating. These are Jesus' students, his pupils. Like they should know better, right? And also the Pharisees seem to be obsessed with Jesus being a sinner. Like that, my verse 25, or no, verse 24. For the second time, the Pharisees called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner, talking about Jesus. The man born blind answered, I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. And that too, like this guy's like, listen, I don't know if he was a sinner. Like, I don't know what his deal is. What I know is that I have been changed and transformed because of my encounter with this person. Like, isn't that what matters here? Why are we like, judging whether or not he might be a sinner? does it not count? I can see people, okay?
Yeah.
Whether or not this man is a sinner, I can see. My whole life has changed. How I move about the world has changed. So who cares if he's a sinner or not? Why? Like, it's almost like they're just missing the entire point.
Exactly. It's almost like they're asking the wrong question, or like folk,
Yes.
and then he's kind of like, in his own way saying that to them. And then, they're asking like, well, what did he do to you? And he's just like, I've told you, like, why are you so obsessed with this? Like all these little details, like what? And I like have to wonder, like what was their end goal? Like, did they also like want to replicate healing?
Mm.
Like what were their like, they're like, oh, maybe there's some kind of like scientific method we can follow, Rachel, like you were talking about earlier,
Mm.
but
Mhm.
yeah, he says, are you so eager to become his disciples? I love that he says that to them. And then they're like, then they go off in a tizzy, like they're all butthurt about that and
Ugh.
jump all over him.
I think this is like my favorite part. Well, in verse 30, when like the man born blind finds his voice and he's like,
Yes.
here's the thing, okay? Like, I don't know where he came from, but he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but God listens to those that obey, and do God's will. This has never happened before. If this man were not from God, how could this happen? Like, that's the strongest statement he says, right?
Mhm.
But then the Pharisees, you were born entirely in sin and you are trying to teach us. And that line has like over and over again this week, in my various conversations and with folks, like who are the people that we feel like we have nothing to learn from? We couldn't possibly learn from a woman. We couldn't possibly learn from a teenager. We couldn't possibly learn from a drag queen, right? They have nothing to teach us, And that is just like, man, wrecked me. Like, you're trying to teach us. Who do you think you are? Like, we know God, we've been doing this for a long time. I mean, that's a challenging word.
Yeah. And
Oh,
no, you go ahead, Rachel.
no, I
Take it
want to
away.
hear what you were going to say.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love going off of that part with the Pharisees like losing their shit, like ultimately and throwing him out, that
Mhm.
Jesus circles back and finds him. Um and I mean, I, I don't know, like imagine like I imagine this man getting thrown out into the street like in Aladdin, like the Disney movie, and he's like laying on the ground and Jesus like shows up and like gently picks him up and um brushes him off, and um and Jesus asks, do you believe in the Son of Man? And this man who was born blind says, point him out to me, sir, that so that I can believe in him. And Jesus is like, you're looking at him right now, don't you recognize my voice?
Mm.
And I just can't imagine like that experience, like in my mind, of like recognizing that voice. And I think that speaks to me of like recognizing that, like the voice of the divine in me, like recognizing that voice. What does really loving comfort and this presence that would find you after you've gone through all this crap with your parents, with these religious leaders, with your neighbors, like that this person comes back and says, don't you recognize my voice? Like it's almost like Jesus like never left him,
Mm.
it's like, and I don't know, like that to me is just so a really touching, a precious moment, if you will. Those
I
little
hadn't
figurines.
even realized the man hadn't seen Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't realize that till you just said that. Oh, right. Because when Jesus sent him off, so he had never seen him.
Yeah. And that's like a whole other layer. Like, don't you recognize my voice? And um,
Mm.
I think that's so beautiful. Like, and then he's like, here's why I came into the world. It's, to bring light to everybody and to bring joy. And then I guess the Pharisees are like standing at the doorway, like listening, because they're like, does that mean you're calling us blind? And yeah, I really appreciate that Jesus is like, hey, it's me. Hi.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that section at the end, that encounter between Jesus and the man at the end is just so compellingly brief and non-verbal. After so much like verbiage throughout this entire chapter, like these sort of, yeah, these debates, these arguments, these, picking apart theology and ethics and all of these really big things, and then it's just such a simple exchange with such few words. Even just like scrolling through the whole the whole thing, it's like we have these chunks of paragraphs, and then those few verses are just, yeah, probably no more than like 25 words that they speak back and forth. And that's just so beautiful. Like that's what it comes back to, like the simple exchange premise. Yeah, and I think to kind of move back just a little bit to where where he finally like claps back at them. I found that so it felt like such a like relief to me that he actually begins to sort of stick up for himself and takes it on and removes himself from the premise in a way of like, I'm not going to keep having this conversation with you. I've said it a million times. I'm not repeating. My time is worth more than this. I've said it 3 times. You don't have it by now. Like, there's such a like self-value in that. And it's like, why do you want to know? Are you doing this just to argue with me? Are you doing this because you think you're going to win? Or do you actually want to follow him? If you're interested in my testimony, I will share it with you once again. But if you just want to argue about my identity and my worth, I'm thinking about the United Methodist Church right now. I don't know how much I have left in me to have this conversation with you, because like the emotional labor that takes to argue your own worth and value with an institution that inherently thinks you don't have it. How many times like are you going to be able to say the same things before you're like, is this worth it? Is this good for me? Is this like what's the why of it all? Are we actually getting anywhere? So yeah, I found that all compelling. And it's like you read the whole thing, but you finally get to that. It's like, yes, you tell them.
Well, and then of course the hope being that like this man kicked out of the institution still encounters Christ,
Yes.
Because it turns out that that's where Jesus is hanging out. And the other thing, as you were saying that, Rachel, this made me think of when people like talk about people who are in the room as though they're not in the room, right? So we see this at like general conference. We see this at every level of the United Methodist Church, annual conference, jurisdictional, like people getting up and talking about queer clergy or queer people and, the United Methodist Book of Discipline, like as though, talking, well, their lived experience, they couldn't possibly be called by God. They couldn't possibly be called by God because we have decided that there's no way God would not call a queer person's ministry. And that, I mean, oh my gosh, that the evil that is. Let's have a conversation about somebody that's in the room, listen to them speak, deny them their voice after we've asked them to speak, which is almost more offensive than just kicking them out in the first place, right? Like, I'm trying not to say the F word right now, but that's what it's fucked up. Sorry if there are any children listening. It is.
I also, go ahead, Charles.
No, I'm just like, why am I like, why do I do that? Like, why would we keep doing this? Like, why, what is it, then maybe that's a different podcast for a different day. But like, that's just, yeah. Okay. Rachel, please, please go.
Please pull us out of this depressive pit.
Yeah. Sorry, I brought us there, but let me just back us right on.
No,
up.
no,
Yeah.
that's fine. We can also just hang out here for a minute. if we
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
We are in the wilderness.
Linger in the wilderness. That's right. So in verse 34, which Sarah, you had pointed out, which is the way that that's been emerging for you repeatedly this week of the, they responded, you were born completely innocent. How is it you dare to teach us? When you were talking about that before, it also was compelling to me that they're just focus on how he was born, that like in your origin, this is your origin story. There's no way you can grow beyond it. Like, I don't want to, again, like pathologize being blind or like what he is, what the change was that took place for him. But they just keep going back to, you were born in sin, you were born in sin. And I think Charles, you said earlier of like this sort of just, that's your lot in life. So that's what you have to do. Like, there's no hope for you. There's no other path. There's no, there's nothing else for you. And it's like, they just being completely bogged down by someone's origin and what that means for them, what we've decided that means for them, right? Like they made him beg. Society decided that because he was born in sin, that means you are going to be, financially like bereft. You're going to be, unhoused, or his parents decided, as we talked about before, like, we're not going to help you. That's what you got to do. So just when you were reading that verse before, Sarah, I just caught it. You were born in sin. So what are you doing now? We don't know how old he is, but it's like, dude, I was born like decades ago. Like, where are we past that now? Like,
and that point you made too about like, this is your origin story, and so you can't change. I mean, I think that's how we keep people oppressed and how we keep people down, and how our systems and structures are constructed and designed to keep people living in the same cycles of, poverty. And I mean, it's basically, what you're born into, you cannot escape. And then if you escape, you're like this amazing, incredible rock star. And just the inequity is so pervasive, and again, evil. In our United Methodist, in our membership baptism liturgy, it says, one of the vows you make is that you will now I'm gonna mess it up, like, resist the spiritual forces of evil and wickedness in the world, and repent of your sin. Can you quote it directly, Rachel?
I think I thought you were going to do a different one, but there's the resist evil and oppression, whatever forms they present themselves.
Yes.
But, yeah, I don't know if that's the one you were.
Well, and I was thinking about those like the spiritual forces of wickedness.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, that's a language that I used to early in my ministry and my discipleship. I like avoided because it was heavy and made me feel kind of like icky and a little like judgmental and sort of condemning, like, and I've been embracing that so much lately. I'm truly have become a, progressive evangelical. Like, I just feel like that's what we're facing. Like, that's what we're up against. And these, are the systems and structures that we rely on. Capitalism, I mean, this unfettered capitalism, the disparity, economic disparity, and that gap continuing to widen. I mean, that is the spiritual forces of wickedness alive in our world. And how is, I don't even want to say the church, because the church is like pretty much already failed at that. And we're also kind of like, okay, you're imploding and caving in on yourself, and hopefully a new expression of discipleship and Christian practice will emerge from the ashes. We believe in resurrection. And maybe then there will be an opportunity for gospel people to respond to that. But I think that's what we're seeing here. I mean, just this man could not possibly live beyond the constructs and boundaries that this world has placed on him. Like, this is who he is, period.
Yes to that. Like, that it's like they have, I don't want to just say the Pharisees, but people in society, they're like, these are my equals, right? These are my peers. And then there's other people, and you put a filter over them. And it's like this blind man, or this man born blind, had this one filter, and that's all they could see. And even though he's like, hey, I stepped around this, like, this isn't, I'm doing something different now. And they're like, no, you can't, like, this is, you have to stay this way for us to be able to relate to you.
Mm.
And I think about that, not just like, but other like people who have been incarcerated, like, you're only this, and um it's so much easier for us and our egos to like put people into like one bucket, and like, this is you, and this is how you've always been. And there's a lot of nuance obviously with dealing with that, but in this story, um I keep thinking, like, what is Jesus, like, if I had like one thing to take away that Jesus is like telling me, with this story. And I think it's, um I don't know what it is. I thought it was going to come to me in that moment, but
Oh.
I think I just, yeah, I like to present you both with these things, like, to chew on too, because I am, in my mind, as you guys speak, it's always like sparking things, for me, like,
Totally. Same.
but just, yeah, that idea of, I can't see you beyond how I've known you before. And um
Yes.
and I need you to stay that way so I can remain comfortable.
And so I don't have to change, and I don't have
That,
to be transformed.
Yeah.
yep.
So this is something that came up in the Tibbetts Wednesday Bible study, was specifically relating to, folks who are differently abled, and how there is this, like, a responsibility is put on folks to not let whatever their disability or different ability is impact them or impede them from walking through society like everybody else. So we're getting better at this, like, as the dominant culture, but ultimately, like, oh, you are in a wheelchair. Also, my dad's a quadriplegic, so I'll speak from being the daughter of a quadriplegic. Oh, you're in a wheelchair. That sucks. If you want to get into this inaccessible place, you have to bring your own ramp, right? All the doorknobs. This is the thing. When after my dad was injured, I realized most doorknobs are like round. You have to turn. But when you can't move your hands, a long doorknob is a lot easier to open. And all of a sudden, my eyes were open to doorknobs. Right? I was like a little 9-year-old girl realizing, like, you should really consider replacing your doorknobs, right? Like, but this came up at Bible study that, some folks were saying, based on their own lived experience, it's like up to the person that is, differently able to figure out, how can I not let this impede me? And then also to make sure other people aren't uncomfortable because of their disability. So how can I make you more comfortable with me? Not, it's up to you to face me in my differences and work through that, right? Work through your judgment and preconceived notions and assumptions, and deal with your shit, people, and see me as a person. It's not my job to make you feel comfortable. So I'm thinking about that with this man born blind. Like, all these people are now uncomfortable that he can see, right? Like, wait a minute, what is his role and responsibility here? And he's speaking on his own behalf as he's being asked, but nobody's taking him seriously. I just thought that was really interesting insight, like, around ableism and, how our dominant culture navigates and treats people who are disabled in terms of how they're expected to move through the world. Without being resourced and supported and affirmed and seen as people. Like, wow, there's a lot of things that are pretty effed up in this scripture today. This is a heavy one, folks, but
It's bringing up a lot of stuff.
I know
It's like we had like a jar with like mud at the bottom, and then we just shook it up, and we're like, looking at all the particles floating around and be like,
Just
oh
settle.
shit, like this was this was more than I thought it was gonna be.
Yeah, that's what happens when you come in cold, Charles, having not looked at the text prior to the recording.
You just open
It's
your mouth to
good.
the faucet,
Yes. Yeah.
and it's a fire hydrant, and it sprays you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that speaking to making yourself uncomfortable so others can be uncomfortable, or not wanting to be a burden, like
Yeah.
I have felt that in my lived experience as a queer person in a conservative church, you know, for the most majority of my life. And um
Mm.
how you s- I'm really proud of this man for standing up for himself, because I felt like it's so easy to slide into that gaslighting yourself of like, oh, maybe I didn't have that experience, and maybe I'm not right because everybody around me and these people love me, why would they? So I take heart from this man born blind. I don't want to keep calling the blind man, this unnamed man, standing up,
Child
and
of
then they
God.
throw him out, this child of God, and Jesus circling back to him. um but yeah, that is like, it's everybody's like trying to make him doubt himself, like,
Mm.
or just doing all these things to like, are you sure, like what happened, and like how did this happen, and can you describe that again, and more detail please. And he's like, people, you're missing the big fucking picture, like
Yep.
I
Yep.
can see
Yep.
now, like get your
Yes.
heads out
Yes.
of your asses
Yes.
and like let's go.
Imposter syndrome. Like, let's just totally instill this in you so that you can never feel confident in who you are and are constantly questioning yourself. Oh, but it's on you, by the way, to work through that. We're not going to change. You just, good luck.
Because we're the ones in power. We have the power, and we
Yes.
don't want to share the power or to give up the power or whatever we perceive as like being in their society, the in crowd of their society.
Mhm.
And it doesn't just like work in this context. It's like, you see that like all the time in different groups of people.
Which is, it's so, I mean, I guess it's not crazy because we're human and we have egos, but it kind of blows my mind. Like, it's pretty clear that Jesus, teaches about surrender and loosening your grip and like facing yourself, doing this inner work, walking through, facing your fears. And it just seems like over and over again that the Pharisees, just as we walk with Jesus towards Jerusalem, are just like tightening their grip and tightening their grip and tightening their grip. And, I know people like that. And I feel like if I really sat down and thought about it, that there are seasons of my life where I've done that. Maybe because I really didn't want to be wrong, because if I'm wrong, does that mean my whole life prior to that moment means nothing? Right? Like, what does that mean if I'm wrong? Yeah, mm,
That's something I've been thinking about lately. Would you rather be right, or would you rather be at peace?
mm,
And not that you can't be both, but that tightening down, I feel like I've been going through seasons of that even more so.
mm,
But not to take us way off topic, but since moving to North Carolina, I've had a lot of downtime to reflect and to be with myself. And I've noticed patterns in myself where I'm like, why am I clenching down on this? Like, like, let go. Why are, and in different things, but um, just that pattern of contraction, and like seeing myself like following all these rules or whatever rituals I have for myself. And um, like I can empathize with the Pharisees for like wanting
right.
to follow what they think is right. And they're like, this has worked for us before for all this time, or however many years, right? This has worked. And it works until it doesn't. And then you have to readjust, right? And you have to say, and that's something I've been doing personally. Like my faith, my belief isn't giving me life. It's not, I don't want to say that like in a super lighthearted way, but what are my beliefs doing for me? Are they giving good fruit is coming from them? Is, like, what is this happening here? And I think the Pharisees remind me, like, yes, there's a time and place for tradition and following what you think you need to do, but if it's not working for you and it's not helping you be
Grow.
there for your community or grow, or like, you gotta start asking these questions. And that is really, nobody wants to do that. Again, like, nobody, like, if I've been doing this my whole time, like, have I been wrong? And um I think part of the
Mhm.
hope of like Jesus here is like, there's he's bringing everything into the clear light of day. um our judgments, our rituals, our traditions, and thinking about the United Methodist Church and like its implosion or whatever is going to happen. um Maybe, it's not working for people anymore, and people are like, this isn't what we need anymore. And that's can be a scary thing, because this institution has been here for how long, in some form or another. Um and yeah, the hope from this message of, um Jesus is like still there. And I think, I like I keep taking heart from that he circles back to this person. And and I have to think that Jesus is still here with me, with you, with everybody, whether they call it Jesus or not. um that hope, and that, you recognize my voice. I keep
Mhm.
I keep hitting back to that, because I'm like, and how are we helping each other hear the voice? And we have to do it for ourselves first, I think.
Well, and how could this man hear the voice of Jesus within himself if he's constantly listening to all the people around him deny who he is?
Hmm.
I mean, you can't, no wonder, how could he access that inner voice if he's constantly listening to people gaslight him, and tell him that he's wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just want to sing Born This Way by Lady Gaga right now. That's like coming to mind, because what's so compelling about this interaction at the end is like, it has nothing to do with you were blind and now you're not. It's, do you believe? And
Mm.
it's what indicates Jesus's identity is the sound of his voice, which he could hear all along. That's a sense that is in fact heightened in people who have blindness. Like their other senses are heightened. So it's like he
Mm.
was born as a beloved child of God. He wasn't born in sin. Like he was good as he was this entire time. Like this focus of something is wrong with you. You are born in sin. You are an outcast. Like in this exchange where he circles back, it's just, do you believe? And
Mhm.
listen to the sound of my voice, like you pointed out, Charles. It's so like so beautiful and so compelling, and just affirms such like belovedness and personhood of him in who he was at the very beginning, how he was born. So that's why I'm singing Born This Way. And
I'm
it's
gonna link
also,
it. I'm gonna link it.
do it. And it's also, it's just so, it's listening to the both of you reflect like how someone who they ignored largely until this day, being affirmed and loved and seen, is like crumbling their entire worldview. Like, why do we take it upon ourselves to police other people
Yeah.
so much? It's like, I'm picturing Jenga, right? You take out one little thing of, again, this person you've never paid attention to in your life. You walk past
Yeah.
begging on the street corner a billion times. All of a sudden, there he is, just restored to society and just no longer someone who is blind. And you're like questioning everything about who you are and the entire structure of society. And like, why do we as humans feel such a need to decide who is out, who is in? And as soon as God's love, God's expansive and unbounding love is brought to our attention, we have to decide, but not for you. It's not for you. And what does that say about me? If it's for you, what does that say about me?
Yeah.
And like the fact that it just shakes them so thoroughly to their core, it reveals something so extremely human about about us, our world, our culture, those tendencies. So,
which I think just speaks to the power of the incarnation too. Like, really, that God would enter into this, trench. And I mean, yeah. Bottom line, we all need therapy. Everybody go to therapy, everybody get a therapist, and we all need to develop spiritual practices to ground ourselves in the spirit and do the inner work of listening to our inner voice.
That's a benediction right there.
Yes.
Bottom line, we all need to go to therapy.
Bottom line, we all need therapy. Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is so good. I also keep thinking about, I'm noticing more, and it's probably because we're podcasting this season of Lent, but the threads through these lectionary gospel readings. And honestly, I'm like embarrassed how much I love the lectionary, because I'm pretty confident that no women were a part of forming it. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I would love to be wrong about that, but I don't think I am. But it really is brilliant. And this, this continuity we see, Jesus having this question with Nicodemus, this religious leader, this conversation, and then with this unnamed Samaritan woman at the well, and now with this, man who was born blind. And even like last week, the Samaritan woman, she says, I know the Messiah is coming. And Jesus says, like, I am he. And she believes, and she runs off and tells everyone, what's happened. And then at the end, Jesus stays for 2 days, and the Samaritans come to believe for themselves, and here we have the man born blind who says, I believe. I mean, and Jesus again reveals, like, I am the Messiah. It's me. And how fascinating that Jesus is revealing himself to the people who have been shunned and outcast. And if anything, we should be like running to the margins, to running to the fringes, to befriend and be in relationship with the people we've pushed there, because it's so clear through the Gospels that is where God resides. That is why John the Baptist was living in the wilderness. God is not, I was gonna I'm not
Don't hold back now, Pastor Sarah.
No. Well, I'm just thinking about hierarchy, and it's unfortunate that when an institution forms, it is hierarchical, and the reality is that God is with the people in the trenches. I mean, this is why I'm so saddened by so many of my beloved, talented, gifted, and called colleagues who are walking away from the local church and ministry, or walking away from the local church and finding other ways to live out their call. But we're dropping like flies, and I get it. But I feel so convicted to stay in this trench and to find like the good that's here. And maybe I've just been really fortunate that I'm serving a community where, we are in it together, and we're finding the sunlight. We're finding God's presence with us here in all of the dysfunction of the denomination, the institution, the ways the gospel has been manipulated. Like, we're finding the hope and witnessing, being a bold witness to that. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm fired up. Oh, wow. Heavy stuff.
This was surprising. I wasn't expecting to be so worked up by this passage. I was like, oh, this one.
Yeah. It brings up a lot.
It sure does.
Yeah, it brings up a lot. Yeah, we'll probably be sitting with it for a couple days. Any other thoughts or anything we didn't talk about. I mean, there's a lot. This is another one of those texts you could preach 100 sermons from, and you got to like pick a lane. And I like that we sort of swerve in all the lanes, but
Yeah. I really wish there was an epilogue. Like, did he go
Mm.
back to live with his parents? Did they, they're like, ask him. And did he forgive them for like not standing up, for him? Like, hey, I understand why you're scared. So I took on myself to, to stand up for myself and to say these things. Um, and I also appreciate, just kind of wrapping it up, like the things that we've talked about, how there's all these questions, like the story goes through all of these people questioning him over and over, but then it ends with, again, Jesus coming back. And I think that's reflective of our own inner dialogue. We hear all those loud outside voices first, those judgments, those people said this about me, before we can sit there in the silence to hear that voice of the divine in us. And I think that's just a beautiful kind of illustration in my walk, my personal faith journey. And I think it's important to remind people of that. Like, I know you might be hearing all these voices right now, all these horrible things being said about you, and it's easy to believe them. But underneath all of that is this still small voice saying you are loved, and I'm going to take care of you, and I'm here with you. And I think that's part of the reason why I keep engaging with scripture and being in a faith community. It's because, people need that, that hope, and not that they need the specific Christian message preached to them in this way or something, but if this works for them and they hear it and they hear that, that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, what a journey we've been on. It only took us 5 episodes to start saying the F word, so I feel pretty good about that.
I'm
We
still
held
holding
off.
out. I'm holding out for episodes.
Hold out. Hold out till
Okay.
Good Friday. Okay. That's when we let the F bombs fly. Good Friday. Yeah. I'm so appreciative though of this space that we've created together to just be honest, because I think that's another, part of the facade of like capital C church, is that you have to fit into a box. You have to be a certain way. Like, how you can't be a person of faith, you can't be a disciple if you swear. Now granted, I respect my elders and I do not curse like a sailor with my beloved wise old folks in my life. So if any of you are listening to this, please don't think less of me. That being said, sometimes there's no other word to describe the rage, the righteous rage that you feel. But I'm so grateful that we can do that with one another, and that we're, allowing ourselves to invite anyone who wants to walk alongside us. Yeah, please, those of you who are listening, send us an email, offer your feedback, agree with us, disagree with us, challenge us, question us, affirm us, leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to Tibbet's channel, all the things. And yeah, join us next week. As what's next week?
Lazarus already?
Lazarus. Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah, we're getting closer. We're getting closer to Jerusalem here. That's in Bethany, which is right outside the city, right? Am I remembering my geography? Yeah, can't wait. Thank you both. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate this very much. You guys fill up my heart so much.
Likewise.
Yeah. Okay, we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.